A few weeks ago, a Chinese lab did the one thing the United States had spent 3 years and billions of dollars trying to make impossible. It trained one of the most powerful AI models on the planet, without a single Nvidia chip, not one. And the model that came out the other side wasn't crippled, it wasn't second-rate, it wasn't some national pride science project. It came out cheaper to run than almost anything Silicon Valley is selling, and good enough that American engineers spent a weekend tearing it apart, trying to work out how it was even done. In the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly how China pulled it off, the brute force machine that made it possible, and the one catch nobody who cheered this wanted to put a number on, even though it might be the most important number in the entire story. But first you have to understand the bet America made, because this whole thing is the sound of that bet breaking. The bet was simple, and on paper it looked brilliant. Modern artificial intelligence runs on American silicon, specifically on Nvidia's. And Nvidia's grip came in two parts. The first was the hardware, the fastest chips on Earth for training AI, a class of processor the rest of the world simply could not match. The second, and the deeper one, was software, a system called CUDA that virtually every AI engineer alive learned on, the invisible standard the whole field was built around. So the logic in Washington went like this: take Nvidia away from China, and you don't just remove a supplier. You remove the floor they are standing on, cut off the chips, freeze the country's AI in place. That was the plan. So how did one company get an entire planet hooked? Training a large AI model means running the same kind of math billions upon billions of times, in parallel, and a handful of Nvidia's chips, the H100, and its successors, became the undisputed best instrument ever built for doing exactly that. But raw speed was the easy half to understand. The real trap was CUDA. For 15 years, virtually every AI engineer on Earth learned on it. Every tool, every shortcut, every tutorial assumed it. You can copy a piece of hardware. It is much, much harder to copy 15 years of muscle memory. That was the moat everyone said could not be crossed. So when Washington moved, it moved on exactly that pressure point. First, it banned the top-end chips. Then, when Nvidia built a slower, China-specific version called the H20 to stay inside the rules, the government restricted that too. The result was blunt, and it was effective at first. Nvidia, a company that by some estimates once held the overwhelming majority of China's AI chip market, watched that business fall towards zero. The financial hit was staggering. In a single quarter, the company took roughly an $8 billion charge tied to chips it was no longer allowed to ship into China, and wrote its expected China revenue from that line down to nothing. Nvidia's own chief executive, Jensen Huang, called the ban deeply painful. From Washington's side of the table, that pain was the entire point. China's AI ambitions, the theory said, were now running on borrowed time and second-rate hardware, except China didn't fold. It went sideways, the same move you saw in the last video, in a different arena. The company that stepped into the gap was Huawei, with a chip called the Ascend 910C. And here's the first thing you need to hear clearly, because it's where most of the hype gets it wrong. Chip for chip, the Ascend does not beat Nvidia. It isn't close. A single Nvidia Blackwell processor delivers roughly 3 times the raw performance of a single Ascend 910C. If this were a one-on-one fight between two chips, Nvidia wins easily, and the story ends there. China knew that, so China refused to fight that fight. Instead, Huawei asked a different question, not how do we build a better chip, but what if we stop counting chips one at a time? If your individual unit is weaker, you don't win by matching the other side's count, you win by overwhelming it. You bring 5 times as many. That is the machine I promised you. Huawei calls it the CloudMatrix 384, and it is the heart of this whole story. Nvidia's flagship AI system of this generation wires 72 of its best chips together into a single tightly coupled supercomputer. Huawei's answer wires together 384 Ascends, more than 5 times the chip count, into one system, and once you do that, the math flips completely. At the level of the full system, Huawei's cluster delivers around 300 petaflops of AI compute, roughly 66% more than Nvidia's flagship rack. It carries more than 3.5 times the total memory, and more than twice the memory bandwidth. So the chip loses, but the cluster wins. Brute force, deliberately chosen, out in the open. And this is not a slide or a prototype. Huawei's cloud division confirmed this past June that the system is already running, live, serving real customers who need that much compute. But a machine is just a machine until somebody builds something real on it. And that is where this story stops being a hardware spec sheet and becomes genuinely unsettling for the people who designed the ban. In April, the Chinese lab DeepSeek, the same one that rattled American markets a year earlier, released a new model, version 4. Now, plenty of labs release models. Here is what made this one different. A research group that included Huawei completed the full, heaviest stage of training one of these models, a system with 1.6 trillion parameters, on a cluster of at least 1,000 Ascend 910C chips. And the flagship of that family, the version called V4 Pro, was the first DeepSeek model designed around Huawei's chips from the very first line of code, rather than being squeezed onto them after the fact. Read that again. The most sensitive, most compute-hungry part of building a frontier AI model, the part the export controls were specifically designed to choke, was done in China, on Chinese silicon, with no Nvidia in the room, and the model that came out the other side was not a science fair project. It was priced to draw blood. DeepSeek set the cost of running V4 Pro at around $3.50 per million words of output, and a lighter version at 28 cents, pricing that undercuts most of its Western rivals so sharply that the comparison almost looks like a typo. The thing the ban was supposed to make impossible didn't just happen. It happened, and then it came in cheaper. So at this point, the obvious question is, if this works, why isn't everyone doing it? Why is this not simply game over for Nvidia? And that brings us finally to the catch, the number that was missing from every triumphant headline. The number is power, electricity. Remember that Huawei wins by using 5 times as many chips. 5 times as many chips draw an enormous amount of energy. The semiconductor research firm SemiAnalysis, which published the closest thing anyone has to an independent breakdown of these two machines, laid the trade out in stark terms. Nvidia's flagship system sips, relatively speaking, around 145 kilowatts. Huawei's CloudMatrix, to deliver its bigger numbers, pulls roughly 560 kilowatts. That's close to 4 times the power for the same job. Measured by performance per watt, how much intelligence you get out of each unit of electricity, Nvidia's system is still more than twice as efficient. China didn't break the laws of physics, it paid them off, in energy. And that is a much bigger deal than it sounds, because it tells you the precise shape of this strategy. China is converting 2 things it has a lot of, cheap, abundant electricity, and the industrial will to build chips at scale, into the one thing it was denied, frontier AI. It is a completely rational trade if you have power to spare and a state willing to subsidize it. It is a disastrous trade for almost anyone who has to pay a competitive electricity bill. So this is not a clean exportable victory. It is a very specific solution to a very specific siege. There's a second part of the catch, and it's the one I'd watch most closely. Hardware was only half of Nvidia's moat, the easy half. The hard half is CUDA, that 15-year head start in software. Migrating a model like DeepSeek's off Nvidia's tools and onto Huawei's reportedly took serious time and serious pain, and it is exactly why V4 arrived later than people expected. Every Chinese lab that follows has to walk through that same fire. But, and this is the part that should genuinely worry Nvidia, somebody just walked through it and came out the other side with a working frontier model. The first crack in a wall is always the most expensive one. The cracks after it are cheaper. So let's be careful and honest about what we actually have here, because this channel is not in the business of selling you a Chinese miracle any more than an American one. What we have is real, a frontier-class model, trained on domestic chips, shipping at a price that embarrasses the competition. What we don't have is a free lunch. The energy cost is real. The supply of those Ascend chips is still constrained by China's own manufacturing limits, and the software ecosystem is years behind. This is not Huawei beating Nvidia. This is China proving it can no longer be turned off, which is a different, and in some ways more important claim. And that points at the quiet irony underneath this entire saga. The export controls were built on an assumption that dependence on Nvidia was permanent, that the moat was too wide to cross, and that denial would therefore keep China a step behind indefinitely. What denial actually did was hand a guaranteed, captive, billion-customer market to Huawei and force the entire Chinese AI industry to do the one thing it had never been economically rational to do before: build its own stack, top to bottom. Analysts at the Brookings Institution now describe the United States as effectively out of the AI chip market in China altogether. The wall didn't keep China dependent, it funded China's independence. And there are reports that Washington has already started quietly loosening some chip restrictions, not out of generosity, but because once your customer has built a working alternative, your leverage is the thing that disappears. So where does that leave us? With a model that genuinely runs without Nvidia, a machine that wins by burning power most of the world can't spare, and a software wall that just took its first real hit. The decisive question from here isn't whether one Chinese chip can beat one American chip. That was always the wrong fight. It's whether China can drive that energy cost down and that software ecosystem up faster than the West can re-extend the lead it spent 3 years giving away. And the tell to watch is not Huawei's benchmark slides, it's the electricity. Track the power per chip numbers on the next generation of Ascend, because efficiency is where this race is actually won, and right now, it's the one number China is quietest about. That leaves one question I'm going to take apart in the next video. If America's two great chokeholds on China, the chip machine and the AI chip, are both leaking at the same time, then there is one lever Washington still holds that China genuinely cannot root around yet. I'll show you what it is, and how long it might last. If you want it the day it's ready, subscribe. This channel breaks down the China technology and economy stories that are quietly reshaping the world. Packaged sharp, delivered straight, no hype and no spin. I'm Sino Surge. I'll see you in the next one.